Hi everyone, welcome again from me. I've been a little ill recently, so I'm hoping that my
My
voice
voice holds out for
this
this
session.
session, but
I
I
will
will
do
do
my
my
best.
best.
I've
I've
got my
got my
water
water
next to
next to
me,
me,
so
so
thank you
thank
for
you for
joining
joining
me.
me.
A little bit of an echo there. There we go. Yeah, thanks for joining me on this session. And today, what I wanted to talk about was document accessibility, and to sort of explore a little bit about whether HTML or PDF is the right format for that, but then also to look at some solutions for helping make documents more accessible. So just a little bit about who we are at the beginning, just so you know why we're talking about this. So essentially, Crawford Technologies are a software and services company. And we work across some broad areas, but essentially what we do is help enterprises optimize and improve the delivery of their customer communications. And we do that in a number of different ways. And one of the areas that we focus on for that is accessible delivery. So you could say that we are in the document business. In terms of looking at PDF and HTML, we provide solutions for customers in both those formats. So we don't really have a horse in the race, although I will share some of my opinions with you on what I think might be the better formats for documents. So if you think about accessible documents and you think about what sort of documents people might be receiving, you need to think about kind of customer communications as a whole. So there's been a lot of a big evolution in the way organizations communicate with people who are either their users or their customers over the last sort of 30 years. So it used to be pretty simple. You would either mail something out to your customer. Maybe they might call you if they needed something. But for a long time, that was kind of the way that you communicated with people. Today, what you've got is a situation where organizations, whether they're public sector or private sector, are really communicating in multiple different ways with their customers. So they may have a website, they may have a mobile app, they might have other sort of e-commerce sites. They may be active on social media and be interacting with customers that way. So lots and they may also have a call center or a live chat or something like that to answer queries. But there are lots of different ways now that customers are communicating with the businesses that they have sort of services with. So if we look at the sort of direction of travel of that and we look at what's driving that, it's really that kind of digital adoption that's happening across multiple industries. This is some interesting research that I've put on the screen here that just talks about how from 2019 to sort of 2020, so pre-COVID into COVID, how the sort of adoption rates across various different industries really skyrocketed over that period of time. And although some of that's fallen back a little bit, it's still the direction of travel for organizations is definitely digital. And customers are, happy with that. They like to be able to self-serve. And so that's a continuing step that's always going to be happening, is the more and more digital communications really going on. So that's a kind of evolution of how customer communications have moved over the last few years. And then if we think about, right, what are we trying to communicate with customers, and can that tell us, what the best way to communicate is, i.e. is that via HTML or PDF? So there's lots of sorts of information that you might want to deliver to your customers if you're a service provider or a business. You might have account information. They may hold accounts with you, some sort of customer account, maybe a bank account, maybe an insurance account. You might want to communicate things like their usage. So, for example, maybe they are a mobile phone customer, or maybe they're an electricity customer. You might want to communicate kind of transactions, if you're a banking client, if it's a banking client or a credit card company. Maybe you want to talk to them about different changes in your tariffs or your prices, or maybe things like your interest rates. There's lots of things that you might want to update your customers on. maybe changes in practices, maybe changes in terms and conditions, maybe new things that are happening, maybe, things that would be of interest to them, of local interest or of news interest to them. You might want to tell them about offers that are happening to encourage them to expand their footprint with you. You might want them to sign up for new products or new services, or you might want to tell them about new products and new services. And then you might want to share information about your business as a whole. So there's lots of variation in the type of information that you might want to communicate with your customers. Now, how does that relate to documents and whether HTML or PDF is the best format? Well, you can group that type of communication into a couple of different types, really. You've got communication that's kind of updated regularly. The content's going to change. You might want it to be dynamic. And that's probably something that's really suited to web pages. On top of that, you've got things where somebody might want to keep a legal record of their document. They might want to have it signed so that there's a secure delivery of it. They may want to download it and keep it for their own personal records. And you as an organization may want to archive that. And for those sort of functions, PDF probably is a better solution. Certainly, you can have it's a legal record, it's a facsimile of the document on the day that it was created. It can be signed, there's signed PDF. It can easily be downloaded and stored. All the resources are downloaded with it, and it can be archived by a company in an archiving format. So it's a very good format for documents, but for content, and a lot of that content that we talked about a moment ago is definitely not something that needs to be downloaded and saved. So for that type of content, probably HTML is the better format. So to answer that question in terms of is HTML or PDF a better format for documents, I think that the question really is, do you want to save this information or have this information as a web page, or do you want to have this information as a document? I think if it's a web page, then probably HTML is a good format for that. And certainly, nice and natively accessible, and then it can be improved. But as a document, I think we have to accept the fact that we still have PDFs and that those PDFs are ubiquitous. And just looking at the figures, if we looked at the web pages in the world, it's probably about 5% of all content that's being delivered by web pages. Whereas for businesses, about 95% of their communications are system generated. Oops, sorry, I'm just going to go back a little bit. System generated and delivered via PDF currently. So how do we address, given that that's the case, how do we address what is one of the common concerns about PDF, and that is that it's not accessible? Well, it's possible to make PDF documents accessible. Contrary to popular belief, you can make a PDF document fully accessible and fully usable, and it's possible and simple to do that. So we call this tagged and accessible PDF, and that's something that we as a company focus on because we work with a lot of organizations who produce that system-generated content and need to find a solution to make large volumes of PDFs accessible as quickly as possible and in as automated a way as possible. So let's take a look at PDFs. So there are lots of things that need to be added to a PDF in order to make it accessible. I've just listed a few here, but anybody familiar with the accessibility world and who understand the nature of accessible PDF knows that there are certain things that you need to be able to tag within that PDF. So there are things like your headings, and those come at different levels. So you'll have your heading 1, which may or may not be the title of your document, but will pretty much be the most important piece of information on the page. You've got your other hierarchies of headings that follow. You've got paragraphs, which are other bits of content that are contained within those documents. And then you have things like lists and URL links. and then tables. And in transactional documents, so for any organizations out there who are dealing with sort of financial transactions or tables of information, tables is one of the things that needs to be addressed within PDFs in order to make them readable for people that are using assistive technology. So it's about making sure that columns and rows make sense, and that column headings are connected to data that's in cells. And all of this is possible to do after the fact with a PDF. So even if those PDFs have been created by a system, by a software application, or by a person, and that they were not created accessible at the beginning, it's possible to apply this layer of metadata, so this layer of tagging, to that PDF after the fact. And it's possible to do that in an automated way using AI and also using templating. So I'll come on and explain that in a little bit more detail in a second. But yeah, so there's also things like obviously alternative text that you need to put in. You need to make sure that your sort of language is correct, so that if you have a screen reader user using that document, it's in the right language. And then you need to control things like read order. And for people producing large volumes of system generated content, that can be tricky as well, because read order is often not created correctly when the document's created. So that's how we make our PDF documents a little bit more accessible. And what do we do? What tools do we have that can help organizations to apply some of these tags to their PDFs once they've been created? So I want to introduce you to our Accessibility Now platform. And that platform is able to handle two types of documents you'll see here. We have we divide documents into two categories, and mainly that's because the solution required to make those PDFs accessible is slightly different depending on which category your document falls into. So static content is really that content that we would talk about that's individually created. So a user creates content using some kind of desktop application. Maybe they've created it in Word, maybe they've created it in InDesign or something similar. Tends to be things like marketing information or instruction manuals, user information, that type of thing. And then you have what we call transactional documents or structured documents. And those tend to be things like bills, or maybe high volume customer letters, maybe insurance documents, maybe letters from, health providers, that type of thing. So essentially these are structured content. It's system generated. And it typically will have fixed content, but some variable information will go into it. So everybody will get the same, essentially the same document, but there'll be different details, different customer details, different user details. And so it's fixed content, fixed layout, but with variable data, variable content. So that's what we call transactional. And within our enterprise platform, Accessibility Now, we're able to cover both those types of documents and offer a couple of different solution pathways for people looking to ensure that the PDFs that they produce for their documents are accessible. So we start by, for static content, helping organizations to identify where the documents that they're displaying to the public are. So if, for example, you have publicly facing PDF documents that are on your website, you might want to monitor that those documents are accessible on a regular basis, particularly if you have a large changeover of content on that website or a high volume of documents on there in the first place. So you can do what we call find, testing and fixing of documents. So scan your websites on a regular basis, have it pick up all of the PDF documents and other formats that are on your website, then have that batch of documents tested so that you can get an understanding of whether they've passed or failed the current standards, and that's PDF UA and also WCAG. And then you then have the option within that platform to send those documents for remediation. So that can either be to somebody internally, so maybe the person who authored the document, maybe an internal accessibility team, or you can have this routed to send to a third-party organization that might be remediating PDFs on your behalf. So that's how you sort of find and test those documents. So then let's talk about fixing them. So in terms of that static content, there are some solutions to remediate PDFs, and those can be done in batches or individually. So, sorry, I'm just going to move that presentation back. For some reason, it ran on ahead there. So yeah, you can remediate those PDFs in batches or individually using a couple of different options. So we have within our platform tools that can semi-automate the process. So using some AI, which is actually pattern recognition within the document, we can auto tag large volumes of content in a very short space of time. So maybe somewhere around 120,000 pages in an hour can be auto tagged. And that's great for people who have high volumes of legacy documents. These are all static, so information type documents that they might want to display on their websites or things like that. Then those documents can be finalized, or alternatively, individual documents can be remediated in our individual tagging tool. So you can have your first pass, where you have large volumes of content run through, or individual documents as well, set into an automated workflow. And then you can have your finishing stage, where you take that auto-tagged content and finalize it and make sure everything is good and compliant. Then a slightly different option is if you haven't created your PDFs, or if you're creating your PDFs in Word, there is the option to remediate directly from Word. Now, you might be saying to me, but you can do that anyway. You know, you can create a document properly in Word, and you know, you'll get an accessible PDF out the other end. Well, those of us who are doing that on a regular basis would find that that's not always happening. And also there are lots of people for whom using Word at that level is pretty complex. So there's an option here to add a plugin to Word, which means that you go about creating your Word document however you would currently do it. You don't need to particularly follow any kind of set processes in Word. Just make sure that you're creating it in the way that looks best for you, and then you can use that plugin to walk you through a wizard, which will help you create that document in an accessible PDF format. And we're also developing that at the moment for PowerPoint as well. So that's really static content kind of covered. One thing I wanted to talk to you about, just as an addition, it sort of bridges the gap between static and transactional content, and that's the ability to validate documents. So we can, again, in that high volume or automated workflow, integrate our validation tool to allow organizations to test whether it's static or transactional content that they've created, and run it through a validation tool using the accessibility automated checkers. So you have obviously the ability to automate the checking of documents. Sorry, you have the ability to check documents, PDF documents individually. What this does is it allows you to build it into an automated workflow. So you can check lots of documents at the same time, or you can get it to pick up documents and check them as and when they're created. So a fully automated workflow for checking. And then if we move into the transactional document space, the option here is to sort of automate the remediation of those documents at scale. So I'm sorry about this. I don't know why this is continually running on, but my apologies for that, folks. So you're automating the remediation of transactional and structured documents at scale. So this is a fully automated solution. It allows you to take existing PDF content Well, actually, existing content in any format. So it could be one of the print formats. If you're using a sort of high volume composition engine, it could allow you to use any of those print formats as input. And then you can, why is this not doing this? Right, let's leave this like this. Yeah. So yeah, you can take any of your input formats and you can automate the solution to deliver accessible PDF at scale. So there's two parts to the solution. You template the accessibility portion. So what you need for accessibility, essentially what content needs to be associated with which tag for accessibility or for accessible PDF. And then you run that through in an automated fashion. And that can be, interestingly, can be done as an on-demand solution. So for large organizations who have lots of customer communications that are accessible to people via websites or via portals or things like that, at the point when that document is requested and you have this set up in the background, you're able to have those documents delivered dynamically. So at the point when a customer requests the document will be converted in milliseconds and delivered to that customer in an accessible format without requesting it. It's not a request for an accessible format, it's just a request for a format. So you're able to have all of your documents delivered at accessible PDF, but you're able to store them all in their native formats, obviously, taking a benefit from the lower storage overhead, but also meaning that if you need to change anything in the accessibility layer because standards change or something changes, you can very easily do that without affecting your original documents. So that's the sort of portion of the presentation that's me talking at you. But what I wanted to do, because it's an interesting question around HTML and PDF, it's an interesting point, I think, about how you can automate a lot of PDF accessibility and how you can do that after the fact. So, even if you've got content that hasn't been created in an accessible format, you can do it. You can also, incidentally, in transactional documents, have that as not accessible PDF, but have it as HTML. So you can create an HTML document if you wanted to do that as well. But yeah, I wanted to throw it over to the audience and give everybody the chance to ask any questions if they wanted to. Let me just have a look. Okay, let me look at what. Yeah, no, I found it. I've got it. So I'm not sure if I'm following these in the right order. Okay, so let me start from the top and go down, folks. So I've got a point here that says, please make standard accessible PDFs available, otherwise many people will not be able to access them. Yes, and absolutely. The PDFs must follow the various standards that exist. They must follow the guidelines. Things must be done in the way that makes them usable by screen readers. And that's something that we have in our platform. We work with many of the world's largest banks, some government organizations, and that's exactly what we're doing. We're delivering those fully accessible, fully screen reader, fully compliant, fully accessible to assistive technology. That's the PDFs that we're sending as output to people, and obviously this is software that people are using on their own premises, so it's not a service. I've got a question here which says, many disabilities do not want to self-serve. So there's no self-service here in terms of what we're doing at Crawford Tech. Our mantra is make every document accessible. We are talking about ensuring that everybody's content that they get delivered is the same. If you need the tagging because you're using a screen reader, that's great. If you don't need the tagging, you won't notice it. But we're not making people make requests for documents. These are all documents at the point they're delivered to the customer, are delivered in an accessible format. When I talked about dynamically delivering them, that's just about how documents are stored versus how they're delivered. So dynamic delivery means that original versions of documents can be stored in a large enterprise archive, which takes into account or takes the benefit of the lower storage overheads for those. At the point that any document, from whether that's from a disabled user or a non-disabled user, is requested via the portal, every one of those documents is converted into an accessible format. So there's no people having to select or identify as disabled. All documents are delivered in an accessible format. Okay, I think there's a conversation going on here internally because I didn't talk about any of these things. So sorry, I'm only seeing parts of the conversation, folks. It says sending it by post or otherwise, don't label it. Absolutely, we don't deal with post. We're obviously providing software into organizations that are producing their documents. So I would absolutely agree with that. You shouldn't label something as being, nobody should have to self-identify. Not that it's anything that people should be ashamed of either, but nobody should have to self-identify for anything in order to receive communications with the companies they do business with. And nobody should be identified unless that's something that they want to identify themselves as. Yes, absolutely. So I've got a question here around checking PDFs for accessibility and integrating with online accessibility tools. So ours is not an online tool. This is just a couple of things. It's a tool that people can use themselves. There is some customization that we've done within it, and we have some clients who've customized, things that work for them. So, for example, in the United States, we've added HHS, which is the Health and Human Services Standard. So it's checking PDFs for HHS considerations along with WCAG and PDF UA. But yes, so no, it does not replace the requirements for manual checking. However, what it does is it completes the automated checking in fractions of a second for hundreds and thousands of pages. And for some organizations, that makes that validation process much easier for them to use. Also, the other thing that it does is it enables an automated, so somebody doesn't have to literally upload a document to a checker. This can be integrated into an automated workflow. So as soon as a person composes a document, that document will go for either delivery or proofreading or to the web people to be uploaded onto the website or whatever. At that process, there can be a step in between to ensure that accessibility has been added if you're doing accessibility at composition or you're trying to create those documents in an accessible format in the first place. So it does not take the place. I absolutely agree with you. You cannot check for everything via automated checking, but what this does is it enables people to have automated checking done in an automated way, let's say, so built into a workflow or to load hundreds and thousands of pages into to check all at once. So when we say it's completely, there's a question about it being completely bespoke here. So like I say, it's not completely bespoke in that we're developing any enhancements to that checker internally as a company. But if there is a requirement for things to be, for example, like in the US, there was a requirement to have this additional standard built into it. So certainly that's a conversation that we can have if there is a standard that needs to be considered. That can be done. If there are other things that need to be added, let's have that conversation. Certainly we're a very nimble and flexible company, and if we see that there's a reason for somebody to want something, then we will, talk to them about having that in. So it's not completely bespoke, but it uses the other point I would make there actually is that it uses the standards. So it looks at what is it that all the different standards are, what is it that all the other checkers do, and we can share some information around how we've kind of what I would say is created a super checker, but we can share that information. Feel free to reach out to the guys here. I'm sure they'll be happy to pass your details on, and we can have a talk about what it is that we're doing. So badly, okay. So it says, how does this process cope with material that is inaccessible to begin with? So all of the documents that we help organizations convert via our software are inaccessible in the beginning. So we are what we call a post-composition solution provider. So everything's already been created and nothing has been created accessible. And that's where we would step in with our various different solutions. So what we do for static documents, it's a case of using AI which is really pattern recognition in the document world. So we're analyzing a document and we're adding tags where we see those making the most sense. So that can be anything from sort of 60 to 80% of the content can be pre-tagged in advance. Now, then you would need your human, if it comes to a static document, but you happen to have a table in there, you would check, obviously, you'd want to check the associations between the various different rows and headers and data cells and things like that. In the transactional space, it's very different. All of this is set up in advance. So once you take your sample documents in, you look at those sample documents, you look at the table, what you're really doing is you're building a little application. Some people call it a template, but you're building a little application that looks at that document and it says, okay, this is the headers. This is where the headers fall in this document. This is what these tables look like. And you make that into a template in advance. Now, every time that document passes through our solution, it then applies those tags to the document in the same way. It's fully flexible. So if you have content that varies a little bit, so for example, if we think about tables, you can have a table on a page that might be 3 lines long for some people. But if you're talking about transactions, for example, let's talk about credit cards or something like that. For somebody, it might be 3 lines long because they don't use their credit card very much. For other people, it might be 4 pages long. You can build all of that type of variation into those templates, into that accessible application upfront to account for everything and to correct all of the accessibility issues that your document has. So your document, when it comes out, the other end of our solution is 100% accessible. The tables are created. It's not done with AI. We use AI to help and assist in the process, but everything is done. An application is created. It's fully tested and checked by humans before it goes into what we call production, and then it's set up and run. And it will run then in an automated fashion forever. Like I say, when it comes to the static side of things, it's a little bit different. We use a bit of AI to do what we call suggested tagging. And then there's a human that that intervenes, that uses that tool to correct the information. So a couple of different ways of doing it, depending on what the document is. Very happy to show you and talk to you further if it's something that's of interest to you. Yeah, it's a good question. I've got a point here about a person working in a university where PDFs are often the preferred method of communicating information, and these are mostly inaccessible. How can we encourage people to think about using HTML web pages instead of, or in addition to PDFs? And I completely agree with that. I think that my position, it may not be shared by some of my colleagues, but I think my position is that web pages, there's a lot of content that doesn't need to be a document, and we have typically used documents to house all kinds of content for people, and on websites that's not necessary. It's perfectly possible to have that content, whether it's product information, whether it's sort of changes to, let's say, tariffs or things like that. It's very possible to have all of that stuff as a web page. In a university, it may be that you have student information that's changing on a regular basis. Web pages are brilliant for that sort of changing information. They're great for dynamic content, where you can have different things happening on at different times. And none of those things really need to be PDFs. I think there are some things which at the moment are definitely what we would call document based. So things where people want to save that information for a later date, things where people want to have it signed or secured, or they want a record of something that never changes. I think that's something which is static. It's an exact facsimile of the communication that you received on that day. That's, obviously where PDFs are come in. And what I would say is turn everything that can be a web page into a web page, but that is only about 5% of the problem content that's out there. And if you looked at system generated or documents that do need to be documents, we still need to address those. And that's where making sure that we are either turning them into HTML documents, which is so still documents, not web pages, or making those PDFs accessible. That's, I think, where we need to focus attention as well. So yeah, absolutely. If content doesn't need to be in a document format, if it doesn't need to be bound by pages, then have it as a a page on your website. But if it does need to be a document, let's address that and let's make that accessible. Yeah, we can also, we have a lot of solutions for remediating. So somebody here is talking about prospectuses in universities. So they're producing documents for print. And then obviously things like read order and alternative text are not in there. And yeah, I would, again, I think it's about getting the right tools. So I think whatever organization you choose to go with, look for an organization that makes your job easier. So have, whether that's us or whether that's someone else, look for tools that don't require you to do everything from scratch. Look for tools that build in things that help you, that do some of the heavy lifting for you. And then those little bits of extra that you have to put in as a human don't seem so much. So, we tested our Remediate tool against, another leading tool in the PDF world. And we're talking about a quarter of the time to remediate a document, a static document, with our individual tagging tool. So, that's a lot of difference. I mean, it's not no time, but it's it means you can do 4 documents in the time you could do 1. So yeah, I think it's understanding that there's different types of content. So some content, even though it's not transactional to the uninitiated, so it doesn't have figures, transactions in it. If it's content that's in a fixed format and is often repeated and only certain bits of information change within it, then that is something that you potentially can template. So let's look at static documents and transactional documents as 2 separate things. Let's understand that we can fully automate the transactional content, and then I would say look at the companies that are offering you something that make it easier for you to use the tools required to make those PDFs accessible. Okay, so I have a question here, which is, what do you recommend for documents that are auto-generated from a web page? I mean, my advice would be to organize so without knowing your particular situation, and again, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to answer the question. I'm sure the AbilityNet guys or attendable people will pass on the information to me. But without knowing the particular situation, I think that one of the problems that we've had, because PDFs have been seen as not an accessible format. Organizations have, in haste, got rid of a lot of things that probably people still want as documents. So if you want the information, and which it would suggest that you do if you're trying to save something as a web page, then I would argue that that piece of information should also come in document form. The benefit of that is that that can be made accessible, so that when the user downloads it, it will be an accessible PDF that they're downloading. So I guess that would be my answer to that question. Let's not get rid of all documents from the web. Let's work out which ones are required, and let's work to make those ones accessible. So I've got a question here about images of text. So we don't have a particular solution for that. It's an OCR solution. We do work with an OCR organization, a company that provides OCR tools as a sort of pre-step. But yes, you can take an image of text, depending on the image and depending on, the OCR tool, you will be able to create what we call a text-based PDF from that. So it's taking it out of an image, using optical character recognition to recognize what the text is in there, and then giving you back a text-based PDF. At that point, that text-based PDF can be tagged in the same way as any other text-based PDF. The interesting thing for OCR is it's pretty good, but it depends on the quality of the image. It also depends on the age of the document that's being scanned, as to whether it's being recognized. But there is an option to correct that and edit that text within many of the leading OCR tools. As I say, we don't do that ourselves, but certainly once a document has been OCR'd and it's a text-based PDF has been created, it can then be tagged using our solutions. So I've got a question here, which is, what's my view of replacing PDFs with Microsoft software such as Word? So I wouldn't replace. I mean, Word is a format that obviously all of us use on a regular basis to communicate. But anything that goes out to customers, anything that goes out on the website of a company or gets sent out to customers or users, probably should be created as a PDF. Just so that it can be, it's a better format to receive. It's less editable by the majority of people, and it can also be secured so that it's not editable at all if you want to do that. But again, without knowing the context of that, I might have a different view if I knew the context. But I would say there's a place for Word, but the Word, when it's being sent out and communicated to people, and particularly for accessibility purposes, should be created as an accessible or should be converted into an accessible PDF. Yeah, character recognition can be inaccurate. There are a couple of decent tools on the market, and it depends. I'm very happy to share those with you after. Like I say, it's not something that we do ourselves, but we do work with a couple of organizations that have pretty good results. And we do also work with customers who use those as a first step for some of their content, edit that content, and then obviously tag it using our solutions, whether that's for individual static documents, large batches of static documents, or whether it's actually to set up templates for our transactional automation. So yeah, there's lots of solutions out there. I mean, it's a bit more manual, the OCR process. But if you want to make your content accessible and part of that content is scanned, then it is something that needs to be done. Either it needs to be transcribed by somebody and a new document created, or it needs to be OCR'd so that there's text in the PDF. It is one of those things that if you want to make your content accessible, if you're committed to accessibility and you have information stored in scanned documents, then it is something that needs to be addressed. Like I say, there's a couple of good tools. Happy to share those if anybody wants to reach out. And then once the OCRing is done, you edit the mistakes, and then you can use the standard tools, including ours, in order to make those accessible. Right, so I think there's a couple of other questions, but I think they pretty much repeat most of what I've said already. I think maybe there's 10 minutes if anybody wants to pop anything else into the chat. Or Q&A, I think it was, not the chat. And I will go through and answer these questions after the session as well, if I haven't addressed them, or if any come up that I haven't addressed. But hopefully that's given people, some information that might be interesting to them. Like I say, you can, reach out, I'm sure, via the platform here. My email address, if anybody wants to get in touch, is jblack, so that's the letter J and then BLACK @crawfordtech.com. You can also find our website, crawfordtech.com, and fill out a form on there if you forget my email address. So yeah, nice to have you all attend. If there's anything that you want to pop in the last few minutes, feel free. But apart from that, I think I've pretty much come to the end of my session. Oh, sorry, somebody says there's another question.
Question from Pritesh. What kind of document accessibility services required in the next 5 years?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So I think that's quite a broad question. So what kind of document accessibility services will be required? So I think that it very much depends on the organization. So I think it depends on where that organization is at. I think one of the things that companies and organizations sometimes struggle with is, especially if they're medium-sized or smaller, is where to start, how to put in place a strategy that can help them, take one day at a time and move one step closer to being accessible every day. So fully accessible every day. So I think there's, depending on where that organization's at, they may want to look at things like their website. They may want to look at things like their, are there any documents currently on their website that could be turned into web pages? Are they monitoring the health of their website? Are they monitoring the health of the documents on their website? And then, do they have high volume content or other stores of content that they could then look at leveraging some automated tools to start to work through? So that's kind of what I would think would be the document accessibility services that most organizations would need in the next 5 years.
I'm not sure whether you've covered this one, so apologies if you have, Jane, but Word books, for some reason, don't seem to have page numbers. Does anyone know why? Useless for students.
Yeah, and I don't know why is my honest answer to that question. I mean, I think, Word is a good format to create things in, but it's probably not a format to distribute things in. I think much better to distribute things in another format that perhaps is a little bit easier for you to use, like PDF, for example.
Okay, I'm assuming everyone can hear me, but big thanks to Jane for that session today, and I hope you all feel that you know a little bit more. Many thanks for joining us, and look forward to you continuing with us for the rest of this TechSharePro. Thank you, everyone.